As we're getting started and as Dr. Gampitro is getting ready to share her slides, I would like to introduce our speakers today. And they are Dr. Pam Gampitro, Clinical Assistant Professor, University of Illinois Chicago College of Nursing, the Human Development Nursing Science, and Dr. Claire Biedenhorn, who's a graduate of Garrett Seminary and Chief Executive Officer of Your Listening Partner, LLC. And I'm happy to say that they are presenting today, Grieving the Pandemic Through Stories.
Thank you for the introduction. And both Claire and I are very excited to be here. Claire and I, along with Dr. Celeste Schultz, have recently finished a study on stories through the pandemic. Various participants around the world actually submitted stories. And we thought it was really so poignant that we wanted to bring this to the wellness webinars for the Big Ten. So we will begin. And I will move forward here. So objectives, always need objectives, right? We got to provide an overview of the human impact of the pandemic. We want to recognize how stories can assist in coping with catastrophic events. And we want to demonstrate the process of writing and listening to stories regarding these catastrophic events. So I will begin with a little bit of a background, and Claire will provide an actual demonstration on how to go about capturing your story, because we all have stories. This has been quite an event. So, disasters. Disasters cause stress responses. We all know that. We've heard this for years and years. Natural and man-made disasters really impact the human lives. And we just witnessed the most outrageous catastrophe down in Florida. They're just happening one after another. So these storytelling is not just about the pandemic, but it can be used for multiple stressors. So there's personal and physical resources that are lost or perceived as lost during disasters. You're waiting to assess the damages. Catastrophic events disrupt how individuals make sense out of the world. It just doesn't make sense. I had a home and now it's gone. I had a family and then the pandemic hit and we lost 3 people. It just doesn't make sense to us. And this results in negative or emotional, cognitive, and or physical outcomes. And we all understand that, being in healthcare professions. We all understand the impact that it takes. So January 2020, the United States declared a national emergency in the US. Of course, we all know that was COVID. So across the globe, around the world, there were mandatory quarantines limiting the disease transmission. Travel was restricted. Social interactions with families and friends in the community were restricted. In the United States, between March of 2020 and October of 2021, COVID-19 was the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. The 3rd leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. Since that time, over 1 million people in the United States have died, of which 6 million have passed away worldwide. That's almost 17% of the deaths from COVID happened in the United States. That is why it was the 3rd leading cause of death. So we had quarantines, we had restrictions, and these quarantines and restrictions impacted the grieving and the loss, not only of partners, friends, or colleagues, but of that getting together Those birthdays, we all saw those drive-by parties. Well, they were fun and they might have been kind of cute and great for social media, but it left a hole in many people's soul. There was an increase in anxiety, depression, and overall mental well-being, especially those with pre-existing conditions. And they were frightened, if they had hypertension and diabetes, they were scared. Is it me next? It impacted the earning potential of healthcare organizations and individuals, leading to significant economic losses. And we heard about this as well. So I'm just kind of giving an overview of why this impact has created such anxiety and such sadness for people in the United States and around the world. So telling a story. What happened? Why did it happen? Why do we write or tell stories? Well, it's a step in managing the behaviors that are associated with traumatic events. It helps to cope with the losses and the fears and the distressing experiences. Just want to keep an eye on the time. It reconciles conflicts between circumstances that do not align with their beliefs. So stories help people cope. We all have done it. We've all sat there and talked to somebody about what has happened to us during a traumatic event. We want to use this opportunity to show how stories can actually be therapeutic. So storytelling. Through storytelling, individuals will navigate how they experienced the COVID pandemic or something else, but we're focusing here on the pandemic. How did they experience it? What happened? What were the adversities? What were the emotions attached to it? What did it do to your trust with the healthcare system, the trust with family members, trust with the community, situational awareness and understanding? How did this impact you as an individual? How did this motivate your actions? Did it have you do something? Did it have you create a triage system within your unit? Did it within your faculty at the university? Did you I know in our department, we had these get-togethers every so often on Friday afternoons, just kind of check in, make sure everyone's okay. Motivated actions and creative thinking. The first step towards restoration is telling your story. That's the first step. You acknowledge these events took place. You take these events and you reframe them. Well, why did this happen? Why did I have this loss? This reframing begins a process, and it occurs each time you write or tell the story. Every time a person tells their event, speaks about their event, it's another step towards healing. There's a new worldview that takes place, a new worldview that reshapes their current views. And one adapts to these new worldviews. These stories open doors to healing. So as a research tool, storytelling also reveals visible and invisible interpretations of experiences. It provides insight into the human behavior. And we saw that with some of the stories that we used for our the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's collection of COVID stories. So stories are not static. They are dynamic. And through this process of telling and discussing and reviewing and revisiting, it becomes very interactive as you're working with other people. I'm going to pass this off now to Claire at this point, because she's going to talk about her experiences in using stories and how it makes a person heal through their storytelling. Okay.
Okay.
So Claire, can you take it from here? And can you, we're in two different parts of the country, everybody. Are you able to advance your slides, or do you want me to?
I think I need you to advance them if you don't mind.
Okay, so why don't you pick it up from here?
Okay. So what happens is, my experience is I was a critical care chaplain. And so I have been, in the ICU. I also work with Kentucky Organ Donation, working with donor families. So I've heard a lot of stories. Now, if you think about this static that's just when you get, that's just, like I said, just the facts. But the thing is, with the stories are also dynamic, because when you tell a story, if you think about it, especially something that's bothering you, every time you tell it and put it out there, you're reshaping it. You're changing just a little bit, and you're doing it not only in response to your own feelings, but also in response to the way the person who's listening to your story. So in the way, we accommodate change. We either assimilate what's new into our standing operating position, what we do all the time, or what we can do is we take that story and then change it into what's going to happen. So it's not just black and white, it's dynamic, it's organic. And in the process of telling the story, we're able to manage things on a psychic level. I worked with Katrina survivors and hurricane, and the horrific tales, but it's like each time they tell it, they're doing they're responding, they're changing it just a little bit. So let's go on to the next one, slide. That's okay. So what we wanted to do is this is really brief, but just to give you an idea of how this can work in your setting. Also, something you can teach to your students. This is a different world that we're all living in now. So before you start any serious work with stories, it's really important. Now, this could be a trigger alert, because when you come up with this story that you're going to tell and you start to tell it and you feel weird inside or anxious, whatever, first stop and take a breath. And then do what they call the rule of three. You want to ground yourself. By that, you move your eyes, look at something beyond yourself. You're trying to break this loop of anxiety. Touch something, move your fingertips, hit the table, something that's going to ground you in real life. And then try listening to a noise that's outside of you. Like right now, my garbage guy's outside and he's backing up and I hear the beep, beep, beep. If I pull my attention out there, that helps ground me into what's happening right now. And it's really important too. Now, there's a lot of trauma going on, and a lot of people experience it. So if it's something that is truly upsetting, you might need to talk to a professional about it, or suggest somebody else do too. So I want to go on to the next slide. So before you start, and I know you're going to love this pre and post survey, first of all, on a scale of 1 to 10, ask yourself, how do I feel right now? And one thing that is good to do this is because you'll see after you tell the story, you have something tangible to look at, because you're going to do it afterwards too. And you'll see how it actually can help you feel better. So we're going to, scale of 1 to 10, what's good? And then we're ready to go on to the next step. journal writing has, first of all, what story do you want to tell? How do you start telling a story? If you're not used to being, look, I'm from the South. Everybody sits around, everybody's got a story, and we can jump in a story right now. So how do you start if that's not your tradition? Well, just asking open, honest questions of yourself or whoever needs to tell a story. So you might say, when this started, then that can get things rolling, or maybe write a letter that you're not ever going to mail, but it's just to kind of prime the pump, help you get focused on those emotions that are really calling out to be spoken. Speaking the feelings, speaking the anxiety, that diffuses them. If you can name something, you're taking back your power. You're not letting them run the show. Whatever that feeling is, you can't let them run it anymore. So, or you might say, I didn't handle that well. I wish something had turned out a little bit differently. But once you have it in your mind, the story you want to tell, so how do you want to tell it? Yeah, like I said, journal writing is classic. And I'm a journaler. I do it every day. But some people don't. Some people, that's not the way they want to tell their story. And so you might want to write out a story. I wrote a story not too long ago. I didn't know how to start it. And I'm a widow. And I thought I was stuck. So I wrote a letter to my husband. I started out, "Dear James." And that got me rolling. So and then we discussed some of the props, but you might, writing isn't the only way. Telling somebody that you trust is a good way to express your story. But it's important that you pick somebody who's going to listen, who's going to honor what you have to say, who isn't going to try to jump in and fix it for you, but will honor that very sacred space where somebody's opened their heart to you. Some people like just listening to music. A friend of mine is a counselor, and she said this very petite lady that looked very conservative said, "I like to listen to heavy metal music and just dance around my apartment. That's the way I can get out my story and all that tension." Art, you've probably been to retreats where you work on a collage, or you go to the Dollar Tree and get a box of crayons and some, drawing paper, and just take the time to let it go out of you, let it ease out of you. And then again, movement, just with movement, if you don't want to dance around your house or your apartment, just go for a walk, it's fall, it's beautiful. Just movement, they get your body going and helps you get focused and grounded as you think about your story. Okay, let's do next. So after you tell your story, let's go back to this scale. After you tell your story, 1 to 10, how do you feel? And it is pretty remarkable how often you'll feel better. And not only will you feel better, but I think too that just having that scale is it's like to have something tangible, like, oh man, I was a 10, but oh look, I'm only a 3 now. Oh wow, I feel so much better. And somehow attaching that number to it, sort of a release too. I think that's really good. I was trying to think. So writing in the journal, going over art, movement, music, but the scaling, doing the pre and post really well is very satisfying for a lot of folks. And I think that's good too. So these are just some ideas about how to get your story out there, how to make peace with your story. And then also, there might be a story that you've never told anybody. Something that you really need to release. And if you do that, if you have a story like that, if you write it out, and then if you release it, you can tear it up. I've used this before in groups, and I had suggested they burn it. But what we ended up doing, we were in a facility, so we couldn't do that. So we shredded it. And each person went up with that story that they couldn't tell, had never shared. They shredded it and they said it was great hearing that noise, and that helped them release it. So those are some ideas too. And I know, Pam, you had something that you wanted to share again before we leave. Any questions?
Yeah. Does anybody have questions about what we've talked about? I do have something that was submitted, a story about the pandemic that I thought I would read if nobody has questions, but I want to allow time for that. Anybody? Has anything in the chat?
Doctors Pam and Claire, I don't see anything in the chat, but I do want to share, just listening to you is just so very healing. And I've always thought that interaction with patients and in the community, it was so beautiful to listen to other stories.
Yes.
But I hadn't really thought about like how I might have a story that hasn't been shared. So I personally, and I'm thinking the attendees may agree, I would love to hear the story that you brought to share, Dr. Gampietro.
Okay, this was a beautiful story. It was submitted to the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. Dr. Berwick allowed us to, myself, Celeste Schultz, and Claire, the three of us, reviewed these stories. And this one just spoke to us, and it was from a medical student. It was prompted by the professor of Emory Medical School. He actually reached out to his graduates and said, "How are you guys doing during the pandemic?" Okay, so that's something that we have to think about, right? A faculty reached out beyond the classroom to previous graduates. So anyways, I will read the story. This is how it begins. "Thank you for reaching out. I've been thinking a lot recently about your teaching during our time in medical school, especially during these uncertain times. Your adage that life is shades of gray rings truer and truer. While each day we learn more and more about this pandemic, its impact on human health, and its broader impact on global economics and society, we still face a vast void of knowledge, the gray. As we stare into the abyss, scared for our own safety and well-being, in addition to that of our loved ones, I'm comforted by your wisdom. That chasm, that gray, is where we are called as physicians. It is where we will make the hard decisions that push ourselves to grow beyond what we think possible of ourselves. If ever there was a place to make a real impact, to save lives and shape life, it is here in the gray. It is what you prepared us to do. You can think, I can never thank you enough. We are learning a lot these days, a lot about a virus and its effects on our human bodies, a lot about PPE, social distancing, and flattening the curves. And we are learning how to teach innovatively as well. I look forward to the day when I can see my students together in a classroom or clinic or at the bedside. I look forward to teaching them not just renal pathology and fluid and electrolyte balance, but those nuances, those shades of gray of taking care of a patient. So that concludes our discussion. There are, many slides here on our references that are available to those who would like to dig further into this and possibly bring this idea to your students. or staff. Um,
I love that. I appreciate your sharing. In the chat, there's a comment, storytelling is so powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So much healing is needed.
Yeah.
And listening to the story, offering that healing just is so powerful. So really thank you for sharing and sharing the additional references as well. Thanks.
You're welcome. It was our joy, and we're available for questions beyond today. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.